Hello and welcome to Tea and Oversharing. We are the digital support group for pregnancy, birth and the dicey bit that no one really tells you about, and we shall refer to as the postnatal period. So this episode we are talking all things first trimester of pregnancy. I'm going to put a little trigger warning here. We are going to be discussing unplanned pregnancy, miscarriage and internal exams. So if there's anything there that might be a trigger for you, please bear that in mind before you watch. Getting pregnant. I had an entirely unplanned pregnancy. I was on the pill. I had just moved to Hanoi to take up a job that I'd been working towards for a good long while. So pregnancy was absolutely the furthest thing from my mind at that point. For this reason, when I had to go back to the UK really last minute, and I ended up doing 2 really long haul flights pretty much back to back. And I had to come back to work and go straight back into teaching. And I felt like I had been beaten up and somebody had infected me with norovirus and somebody else had got a great syringe and shoved it in my arm and pulled out all of my life energy. Just kind of thought I had really bad jet lag. And it wasn't until my colleague came back from his fag break and I nearly vomited in his crotch because of the smell of fags and coffee. I kind of thought, shit. So, medical appointments in the first trimester. My situation is probably quite different, I guess, to most people watching who I guess will be UK based, because obviously I was in Vietnam at the time. But it was quite interesting because it was a really early introduction to the fact that, I mean, like 2 UK midwives will have completely differing views on a wide variety of issues. And in my case, I was suddenly doing this across vastly different cultures. And there's also still quite a lot of French presence in Hanoi. So I was seeing French and Vietnamese doctors who were telling me completely different stuff to what I would have expected to hear at home. This appointment was when I was about 7 weeks pregnant. And it was with this absolute classic of a French woman who sort of like got my results and she was like, yes, you're pregnant, congratulations, I hope. And I was like, yeah, oh yeah, like I got over the oh shit by then. And then she said, okay, so you know, you have to reduce the wine intake, and you know, if you have a cup of coffee, make sure you have a glass of water with it, and you know, do not listen to what the English they tell you about the cheese, it's bullshit. And I just thought this was brilliant because it was, I mean, those are like the top 3 things probably that are pushed on you in the UK, like no alcohol, no coffee, no brie. So something pretty horrible that happened in my first trimester was that I had a great big bleed quite early on, which obviously freaked me out. So I hot-footed it down to the Vietnamese hospital and they did a speculum, I'm not sure why, and then did an internal ultrasound. And the baby was there, had a heartbeat, and the doctor had this ultrasound wand up me. And she looked at the screen and she said, yep, got a dirty great blood clot in your womb, probably going to miscarry, nothing you can do really. Go home, lie down, don't move, might help, probably won't, come back in a week if you haven't miscarried. And then she left. And I was lying on this slab thing, having a bit of a cry. And doctors were sort of trying to get in the door, and getting a bit annoyed that we were kind of taking up the room, to the extent that my husband actually went and locked the door, so that I could stop crying and put my pants on. So that was pretty shit. So aside from just finding this whole experience pretty horrible and the doctor's attitude's a bit brutal, I was also surprised by just how paternalistic it was. I very much felt that my role was to be completely passive and to take what they gave me in every sense of the word. Um, and any question like that to me was completely innocuous seemed to be met with this extreme affront. So, for example, every week that I would go back, they would speculum me, and a couple of times they wanted to give me these like hormone suppositories. And I asked what I thought was a really obvious question. So, why do you want to shove the big blunt instrument up my vagina? And what's in the pills? Because I kind of think, if you went to the doctor with a headache and the doctor said, all right, stop eating chocolate and take this pill, you would probably say, oh, so why chocolate? Because maybe you want to know what the ingredient in chocolate is exactly that you can remove from other parts of your diet. Or maybe it's just a bit fascinating that something so simple could solve the problem. And, the obvious thing to ask when anybody gives you a pill is what are the risks and what are the side effects and what's in it, because then you can give consent. And surely informed consent is the cornerstone of medical practice. But certainly in Vietnam, and also I found in my postnatal care in the UK, this just did not seem to be a thing. And it was one of the things that really shocked me about the whole process. So in a way, it was kind of good to be introduced to it then, because it did make me go forward and do a lot of research around birth and my choices in it. So when I came back to the UK for my booking appointment, which I'll talk about in a bit more detail later in the video, the midwife who I saw there looked at me in abject horror when I told her what had gone on in Vietnam. And she said to me, well, we would never speculum a pregnant woman in this country without extremely good cause. And everything that you're describing is completely within the realms of normality. We don't really believe it poses a risk at all. So we would have just told you to carry on as you were. And on the one hand, I felt like this was, a huge relief. And obviously I was very happy that everything turned out the way it did. But on the other, I was kind of thinking, so all of that emotional turmoil and bed rest, because like obviously it sounds great actually in some ways. I've been ordered to go and lie down for a month. Shucks, can't teach those pesky pissed off teenagers for a while. But actually, you're kind of confined in a tiny space with just your thoughts, which are mainly around, is my baby going to die? It wasn't a picnic, So the main thing I came away with in regard to this whole experience of dealing with doctors from different cultures was that each of them had come to me with a series of what was presented as medical fact, with which it was not appropriate for me to argue, certainly, but with which I was not even expected to engage or want to show an interest or have a conversation around. And in fact, what these facts were interpretations of data. And they were interpretations of data that were informed by things like social norms and hospital procedure, which was based on fear of litigation a lot of the time. And I should say I have no problem with being presented with those interpretations and with those mitigating factors in mind, as long as I know that that's what they are. Because again, we're sort of back to that issue of giving informed consent. But what I think was really good about the whole experience was that it made me do my research into the history and practice of obstetrics, into the history and practice of midwifery, and draw my own conclusions based on my circumstances, in consultation with the healthcare professionals that I met. And I think that really helped me to prepare the kind of birth that I wanted. And it certainly played a part in my achieving that although I recognise that I was very lucky to have the birth that I went on to. So this whole experience with the haematoma got me thinking about this unwritten rule that we seem to have, not to mention a pregnancy till you are 12 weeks. Because firstly, if everything is going quote unquote smoothly, you are probably still feeling iller than you ever have in your life. And I remember suddenly understanding the point of the baby on board badges for the London Transport, because it's precisely at the point where nobody could tell that you're pregnant that you really need the spare seat on the tube, because you've probably been vomiting all morning and the smell of the guy's armpit 2 carriages down is hitting you square in the nose, and you are tireder than you ever thought possible, and you feel like you've gone 12 rounds with Mike Tyson. But for some reason, we don't really feel that we can tell even the closest people to us, and certainly not work. Thinking about the reasons for this, and it seems to be basically you don't really want to let your boss know that you're trying for a baby until it's a done deal that you're definitely going to take the mat leave, because it's still very much a thing in our society that you'll get passed over as a woman in that situation, which is depressing enough. And then I thought, well, why else aren't we talking about this, even to people quite close to us, in our family? But a lot of the time I think it's because we don't like the idea of making other people feel awkward, actually. And if you do miscarry, maybe someone might feel a bit awkward about your trauma. And I think there's something very gendered in that. I think that as women, we are definitely conditioned to put other people's comfort before our own needs. And given the fact that it's 1 in 4 pregnancies that will end in miscarriage within the first trimester, it's hugely common, it's hidden in plain sight. There are women turning up to work every day in physical and emotional pain, feeling like they can't talk about it because they don't want it to be awkward and they don't want to lose out on a work opportunity. And it kind of pains me that that's where we are still in 2017. And also, for me, I think until I got pregnant, when I thought about it, if I had a tool, it was from an extremely fact-based, scientific, I guess, point of view. I thought until a certain point in the pregnancy, I didn't even really know when that was. A baby is a ball of cells. And then suddenly there I was at 7, 8 weeks pregnant with my baby on a screen, hearing my baby's heartbeat, and he was my baby from that second. And the thought of losing him, it tore me apart. And I really thought, I wouldn't have the strength to go back to work and pretend that nothing had happened. I would probably have had to, or not had to, I probably would have done. But I had no idea how. And yet this is what legions of women are doing every day. And in fact, when I did go to work, when I was a bit better, there was a choice colleague of mine who came up to me and said, in front of everybody in the staff room, I suppose you'll be buying the drinks then? And I asked him what he meant, and he said, well, those 2 had to cover all your classes while you were off, so you'll need to be buying them a drink. And the rage, the absolute rage that I felt towards this guy. And what did I say? What I had in my head, which was, I'm very sorry, Chris. Next time I shall attempt to have my threatened miscarriage at a more convenient time for those two. No, I sort of politely smiled and walked off and had a little cry in the toilet. Probably the single most helpful thing that happened at my booking appointment was that the wonderful feminist midwife that I saw referred me onto the mental health midwives. So my mental health history is checkered, shall we say. And for this reason, I was at reasonably high risk of developing things like antenatal depression, postnatal depression, and postpartum psychosis. So it's only after speaking to women who weren't in a position to access this kind of service that I realised how lucky I was to have had it, because I basically saw the same midwife from my first appointment back in the UK in the second trimester all the way through to the birth, and then 1 month postnatally. She was like a mate. She would come and sit on my sofa and drink tea and swear like a sailor, and engage me in intelligent conversation in a way that no other healthcare professional that I saw would. I always felt she had time for me. I mean, I know intellectually she was running around South East London like a blue-ass fly, but it never felt like she had anything but all the time in the world. And for that, I will ever be grateful, along with the fact that when I did develop depression and I went through a period of self-harm after my son was born, she was like a ray of light, completely unjudgmental, probably the most positive experience of any kind of engagement with mental health services in the UK that I've ever had. And if for any reason she ends up watching this, I hope this kind of makes her realise how much of a help she was, not just to me but to others in my position. Obviously these services are currently being cut up and down the country, but if you do find yourself in a similar position and you do have access to a service like this, I cannot recommend it highly enough. So thank you for tuning in to Tea and Oversharing's very first video. It's very exciting. Please subscribe. Please join the discussion on Facebook. You can find the Facebook group in the description for this video. And please do remember that we are a supportive space, and that we are an inclusive space. We're committed to being a safe place for people in the LGBTQ community, for people of colour and for disabled people. There are a myriad of places on the internet where you can find people slinging mud at each other for their parenting choices, for their birthing choices, for everything to do with pregnancy, birth and the postnatal period. And we hope to be a bit of a haven from that. We hope to be a place where people can find support and solidarity in this time. So please do bear that in mind. And thank you, and we will see you next time when we will be talking all things second trimester. Thank you and bye for now.